Tom Brady and Malcolm X have a lot in common, believe it or not. So Tom Brady is this guy coming out of Michigan, a 6th-round draft pick. Nobody's really checking for this person, and he becomes the greatest quarterback of all time. Malcolm X is some guy in prison. Nobody's checking for him, and he becomes one of the most prominent freedom fighters to ever exist. But there's this debate, right? It was a Tom Brady or is it really Bill Belichick and the Patriots? And so there's this debate which really makes absolutely no sense to me. So let's just break this down. People who are big Tom Brady fans will say it was all Tom Brady and he proved it because he went to Tampa Bay and he won another Super Bowl without Bill Belichick. And that is actually true. He did win another Super Bowl. But here's the argument. If Tom Brady were drafted by the Cleveland Browns, would you have ever heard the name Tom Brady? The answer is no. You would have never heard. He was a 6th-round pick in Cleveland. You would have never heard his name. He never. So to pretend as if his success had nothing to do with being in the right organization, that just makes no sense at all whatsoever. Right? Now, at the same time, people who say Tom Brady's nobody can match his resume. There is not a quarterback who has ever lived who has the resume that Tom Brady has. That's just objectively true. So Bill Belichick, right? He coached for the Cleveland Browns. It didn't really go that well. He gets fired. People grow. They evolve. And so maybe he's a better coach by the time he gets to the Patriots. I don't know. Fine. What's also true, though, is Bill Belichick never wins a Super Bowl. Well, let me say this. He never wins a bunch of Super Bowls without Tom Brady, right? If it's just him and Drew Bledsoe, it's not going to happen. Maybe he does win one. I don't know. But he's not winning all those Super Bowls. So both things can be true. Now, at the same time, people will say, well, he went to Tampa and that proves it. Well, by that point, he was already Tom Brady, right? He was good enough at that point that he could have elevated a number of teams who at least were good enough. Not the Browns, right? But teams who had enough ingredients that he could have added to, sure. But here's the other part that people don't really think about. Tom got his way because he wanted to stay with the Patriots. Bill Belichick wanted to move on. But Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, is like, nah, we're going to do it this way. And so Tom got his way and he got to stay longer. Bill wanted to move on with Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback. Robert Kraft overrules him. Jimmy Garoppolo goes to the 49ers, and he's playing in the Super Bowl like the next year, I think. So if Bill got his way, could he have possibly put together another Super Bowl run? We'll never know. I'm just saying it's kind of unfair to say, well, Tom Brady proved it. Bill Belichick wasn't given the opportunity to do it his way. Tom was. That same argument, though, applies to Malcolm X. People think that he's this great person, and he is. Objectively, like, there are few people in history more brilliant than Malcolm X, more articulate than Malcolm X, more committed than, like, he was. And so people say, well, the Nation of Islam needed him more than he needed the nation. And it is also true. If you look at the growth of the organization, the Nation of Islam was a tiny little organization with just a few temples spread across the country in the hood with a handful of people in these temples. It was not this huge operation, right? Malcolm comes along and that organization grows. But again, it never becomes this huge entity, even at its prime, even at its peak. Maybe you have 70,000 people, maybe even 100,000. Now, again, total, its active membership is probably less than that. It's never huge. But the numbers that they get, you have to sort of credit Malcolm. However, here's the thing. To pretend that Malcolm would have been Malcolm without the nation also makes no sense. Malcolm was in prison, y'all. So the question becomes this. Tell me what his pathway is from prison to doing all the things he did without the Nation of Islam. What is his pathway? Because he's not going to the black church. Like, he's not going to become a pastor and have a platform like a Dr. King did. Dr. King starts with the black church and he develops a platform doing advocacy. He's not doing that. He's not going to the NAACP or the Urban League. He ain't doing that. Malcolm's background, his family, they were Garveyites, right? They really were adherents to Marcus Garvey, etc. So the message of Elijah Muhammad probably resonates with him, right? Because the Nation of Islam is basically Garveyism with a little bit of religion sprinkled in. So that message resonates with him. And now with the nation, he has that platform. They also have programming. So Malcolm, when he talks to the press, when he talks to people about the greatness of what black people are and can be, he can point to, here's what we're doing as an organization. You need programming. If he's just some guy screaming on the street, nobody would care. Let's say he came out of prison and he was just as brilliant and just as articulate, but with no programming, it wouldn't matter. So again, I think it's crazy to say Tom Brady, independent of Bill Belichick, would have won all these Super Bowls. I think it's crazy to say Bill Belichick, independent of Tom Brady, would be the greatest coach of all time. I also think it's a little bit insane to say Malcolm X, independent of the Nation of Islam, would have been Malcolm X. He could have been just as brilliant. He could have just been just as educated. But he needs a platform and he needs programming to point to. Right? So the Nation of Islam absolutely needed Malcolm X. Malcolm X, in fact, helps bring the nation to prominence, not just with his speaking abilities, but the one thing that really puts them on the map nationally, there's a documentary called The Hate That Hate Produced. Malcolm sort of helps broker that deal to make that happen. And so that documentary gets played on television, and now we have a national audience paying attention to this organization in the hood that nobody had ever heard of, right? So Malcolm does many things to bring attention to the nation. He does a lot of things to bring the nation to prominence. The nation needs Malcolm X. But again, Malcolm X needed the nation. Now, once he moves on from the nation, he tries to establish his own organization. So go back to the Tom Brady thing. Tom Brady moves on from the Patriots. At that point, he's Tom Brady. He's good enough to elevate a lot of things. And maybe Malcolm was good enough at that point in his life to build another organization that would have done great things. We'll never know. I mean, obviously, he was murdered. But the question becomes, this new organization, what is it going to do? Can it mimic what the nation did? From what we can tell, his new organization isn't exactly trying to do the same thing. Now, the nation is reaching out to black folks in the hood. And again, these are working class black people. These are a lot of folks coming out of prison. They were not reaching wealthy black people or even middle class black people. And they're cleaning these people up. And again, I love to point to the data point. Ralph Abernathy, who's Dr. King's right-hand guy, when they go to Chicago in 1966, you can read in Ralph David Abernathy's autobiography, he says that the black people with the highest standard of living in Chicago were the black Muslims. And again, these were poor black people that the Nation of Islam's economic program is moving into stability. This is really important. So what I'm suggesting is Malcolm's new programming seems more targeted at an international kind of thing. It seems more targeted at Pan-Africanism. It seems more targeted towards political advocacy. And that's not what the Nation of Islam was doing. But again, we'll never really know because we never got to see the full extent of what this organization was going to be. Like, we'll just never really know. But again, I'm just making a point that it's hard to separate those two things. I think the two needed each other, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with conceding that.